Okay, let's continue with our discussion on the theories and principles of healthcare ethics. And this is already the third part of the discussion. If you notice, I reverted back to this slide on the acronym for remembering the patient's Bill of Rights. Because in the second part, I think this part, the audio of this part and succeeding two slides were a bit problematic. And so I start this third part of the discussion recreating the recording of this slide. So as you can see in the screen, uh, flashed is a slide about the patient's acronym to make it easy to remember all the patient's Bill of Rights. And every letter no, stands for one right, and it spells exactly who they are, patients. So let's go through each one simply. Um, P is for privacy. The patients have the right to be private. So we as nurses, we close the curtain when we examine them. We don't talk about their case in the hallway or in the elevator. And this we have mentioned previously. A is for autonomy. And we just also learned this from the previous discussion. So the patient gets to decide. T is for treatment info. The patient must know what is wrong with them. What are we going to do? And what it will cost them. So there has to be no secrets. I is for informed. The patient must understand what you said. We don't use highfalutin medical words that they don't get. So we have to explain simply. E is for education. We teach them. We teach them how to take their medicine, how to eat healthy, how to recover, how to maintain their health. N is for no restraint. We cannot tie them down the patient or lock them up just because they are confused or noisy. Restraint is only used in extreme danger. Okay. T is for trust. Everything the patient tell you stays with you. Okay. So we need to protect their information. There has to be authorized access only. And who is authorized to access the patient records? Of course, the patient and the healthcare team. And then S is for services. The patient get good care, no matter if they are rich, poor, old, young, or whatever religion they have. Okay? So, again, let's spell it out loud together. P, again, is for privacy. A is for autonomy. T is for treatment info. I is for informed. E is for education. N is for no restraint. T is for trust. And S is for services. Okay? So, yeah. Now, there are also laws in the Philippine Constitution on patients' rights and autonomy. So if you break these, it's not just unethical, it's also illegal. Okay? So you have to memorize these laws. Let me just discuss a few of them. Now, the first one is the Republic Act 9439, or what you call the Anti-Hospital Detention Law. Okay? This means you cannot hold the patient hostage just because they haven't paid their bill yet. Okay? You cannot keep their ID, their clothes, or lock the door so they can't leave because locking them is a crime. Okay? So, a patient who recovered but hasn't paid the full bill, you let them go home. You follow up for payment later, but you don't detain them. All right? The second is the Republic Act 10932, or the so-called Anti-Hospital Deposit Law. This means in an emergency, you first treat the patient and then you ask for money later. You cannot say, oh, give us 550,000 first before we help you, because that is strictly forbidden. For example, a car accident victim arrives unconscious. So you start the treatment immediately. No payment asks yet. No? And these laws, along with the other laws, no, these protect the poor, but they also protect you because if you follow them, you are safe legally. Okay. And remember, the DOH also has an official list, no, of patients' rights, and our constitution says healthcare is a basic right for everyone. Okay. We have been mentioning informed consent in the previous discussion, and this is one of the most important, no, thing that you will do, which is securing the informed consent, having it signed, no, by the patient. So let me break this down clearly because many students think it's just signing a paper, but actually no. The paper is just proof. The real consent is the agreement in the patient's mind. So to be valid, there are four requirements that are needed. Okay. First is of course, the decision-making capacity. Not the competence to choose, right? So there must be competence of the patient to be able to think and decide for themselves. Okay, are they awake? Are they not confused, not drunk, not a child? If yes, they can decide. If no, we need a proxy, no, another family member to decide in behalf of the patient. Then the next is disclosure or documentation muna pala. So for the documentation, there has to be written consent form. Okay, there has to be written consent form. Uh, and number three is the disclosure. We have to tell them everything. What are we going to do? Why? What could go wrong? What could will happen? What other choices do they have? How much does it cost? No, full information must be provided and no hiding anything. Okay. So, and of course, last but not the least is the comprehension. The patient must understand the risks and benefits. No? Uh, Also, they must understand the words that you are using, no, in the informed consent. So if you use words like myocardial infarction and they don't know what it means, then when they sign, then it is not informed. And when they sign it, then it is not valid. So you instead of myocardial infarction, you use heart attack, no, because that is more commonly understood by the patient. So simple words only. Okay. So again, these are the four requirements. Again, the decision-making capacity, the competence to choose, documentation, a written consent form that really indicates the consent form is voluntary. No? Yan. And then third one is the disclosure, full information provided. The fourth one is comprehension, understanding of risks and benefits. Okay. And if you remember in the chapter one, the first part, no, of our discussion, about three essential conditions, no, for human action, that there has to be knowledge, there has to be voluntariness, there has to be use of the free will. So in informed consent, these are also the same three essential conditions. There has to be voluntary decision, no, voluntariness, understanding of circumstances or knowledge, and of course the deliberate choice or the use of their free will. Okay. Yeah. And we will also discuss related ideas, and these are paternalism and proxy consent. Paternalism is like acting like a parent. When someone says, I know what is good for you, so I will decide for you. So that is paternalism. And there are two types of paternalism. We have the strong paternalism and the weak paternalism. For strong paternalism, you decide for a fully alert, capable adult. Actually, this is wrong, no? Because you are taking away the autonomy of another adult. So we never do this as nurses. For example, when you think that this medicine is good for the patient, so you will just give it without asking, that is, of course, unacceptable. Okay? Now, on weak paternalism, you decide for someone who cannot decide, like a baby, someone unconscious, or someone very confused. This is actually good and necessary. Since they cannot protect themselves, so we protect them. Now, example, an unconscious accident victim. No, we treat them immediately. Okay? And then we have proxy consent. This is when another related idea is the proxy consent. Now, this is when the patient cannot decide, so someone else decides for them. And usually it's the spouse, adult child, or parent. Now, the important rule is that the proxy must decide based on what the patient would want, not what they want. Okay? So, yun. If the patient always hated surgery, the proxy shouldn't say operate just because they want it. So in the proxy consent, there is delegation of right to consent to another person. Okay? And the proxy, this would involve the power of attorney and the living will, no, of the patient. Okay? Next is other related ethical principles are confidentiality and privacy. And these two go together, although they mean different things. So let's make it crystal clear, no, their difference. Confidentiality is to protect the information. So everything the patient tells you, everything written in their chart, their diagnosis, their problems, it is a secret. Okay? And we have the obligation to keep this information as a secret. We never share it with anyone who doesn't need to know. Not your friends, not your family, not even other patients. No, the only exception for confidentiality, you only break this rule if the patient says, "I am going to kill myself" or "I am going to hurt someone." Then you must tell the authorities to keep them safe. Okay. Now, how about privacy? Privacy protect the person, and this is about their body and their space. So we close the curtain when we wash them or check them. We cover them or drape them properly. We knock before we open the door. We don't stand there and talk about their sickness in front of everyone in the hallway. Okay? So yun. So for us to easily remember the difference between the two, for privacy, it's about body and space. For confidentiality, these are about keeping words and data. Both are rights, and breaking them is unethical and illegal. Okay? So again, when we talk about privacy, it is about the person, protecting the person. When we talk about confidentiality, it is more on protecting the information. Is that clear? Next is the principle of veracity or truth telling. This is simply telling us to always tell the truth. It means we should never lie as nurses. We never hide facts. We never use confusing words to trick any patient. Even bad news must be told, but in the right and kind way. Okay? Now, in our Filipino culture, it is very common for the family to say, "Nurse, please don't tell the patient he has cancer. He will get depressed or die of shock. So please don't tell him. Uh, no, please don't tell the patient." But what does ethics say again? That the patient has the right to know. We cannot lie, but we don't have to be harsh. So you say, "I understand you want to protect him, and that is good, but he has a right to know so he can plan his life. Okay? He can participate in his own care and make his own decisions. So let's tell him together gently. Yun. And we will all support him." Okay? So, yun. That is what you can tell the family when they request you. Okay? So, what are the violations of veracity? Omission, no, leaving out critical relevant facts. Commission, intentional lying to patient or family. and cloaking in jargon, using medical terminology to hide the truth. Right? So when you say no, it's nothing serious. When you are telling about a diagnosis, then you're actually violating the principle of veracity. What you're supposed to say, yes, it is serious, but we are here. We will help you, and here is what we can do. Okay? Because truth plus kindness is equal to the best care that you can offer to the patient. Now let's talk about another fidelity. Although we have discussed this previously, but again, to elaborate some more, fidelity is being promises. And it fits our Filipino values perfectly. It means we are loyal. No, our word is gold. Okay, in the Philippines, we have a phrase for it, palabra de honor. Okay? That means my word is my honor. So if you say you will do something, you do it, no excuses. Why is this so important? Because trust is everything, no, in patient care. If you say I'll be right back and you never come back, the patient will never trust you again. They will think she lies, she doesn't care. Okay? So for example, you tell a patient, I will bring your medicine in 5 minutes. Even if you get busy, even if another patient calls, you find a way to keep that promise. And remember that case we talked about earlier, no, when you had to leave patient A to help patient B, that was fidelity again versus justice. And justice wins, but you must explain and apologize to keep the trust. Okay? Now, we again highlight another ethical principle, no, the principle of double effect. Although we made mention of this already in the previous discussion, but no, let's elaborate some more on this discussion. This is the principle of double effect is actually your number one tool for hard decisions, and you will use this most of the time, no, as a nurse. And it is called again the principle of double effect. It applies when one thing you do will have good result and a bad result at the same time. For example, giving a strong pain medicine. The good part is that it removes the terrible pain. The bad part is that it might slow down breathing, no, of the patient a little bit. So is it okay to give it? Yes, if you follow certain conditions. And in the principle of double effect, there are four rules, no, or four conditions that has to be followed. That has to be followed for an action with both good and bad results to be morally permissible. Okay? The first one is that the first requirement or specific condition is that the action itself must be good, no, or neutral. So giving medicine to help the patient is good. Okay. Number two, second condition is that the indirect intention. You actually are intending to achieve the good part only. But of course, and because you want pain relief, but you don't want to slow down the breathing of the patient. It is just a side effect, but that is not your intended effect. No, it's the other one. It is pain relief. No, that is your intention. Okay. So uh the third condition is that the good, no, doesn't come from the bad. So pain relief doesn't happen because breathing slows. Okay, it should be the other way around. So the third condition is that uh, the effect or the intention that you want to have is not achieved through bad means. Okay, because the end does not justify the means. So good effect not achieved through bad means, and sometimes no so dapat the good effect must happen first before the bad effect. Now when these two or at least no these two effects will simultaneously happen. No, that can still be allowed. No, it will simultaneously happen. But it will never it's not permissible if the bad effects happen first before the good effect. Okay, so that is the third condition. The fourth condition is proportionate judgment. That good is of course bigger than the bad effects. So relief from terrible pain is way more important than a small risk of breathing. Okay? But of course, you need to be prepared how to also support the patient in case the breathing slows down. All right? So again, the four conditions should be good act, good intent, good means, and good balance. Can you repeat that? The four conditions again of the principle of double effect are good act, good intent, good means, and good balance between the good and the bad effect. Okay? Now, when you are in a situation where something wrong is happening, but you are just part of the team, then you need to understand the principle of legitimate cooperation. Okay? And there are two types of legitimate cooperation. First is formal cooperation. And this is bad. This means you agree with the bad thing. You support it. You think it's okay. No, and in patient care, we don't do formal cooperation, no, with anything that is bad or anything that is wrong. For example, a doctor says, let's write fake records to get insurance money. Okay? And when you say, okay, good idea, then definitely that is formal cooperation and that is wrong. Another uh, another type is material cooperation. This is when you help, no, do the bad thing, although you do not agree. So you think it is wrong, but you are just following instructions and you can change it. This is only allowed if it's necessary and doesn't cause harm. Okay, for example, you are told to give a medicine. You think that so you are told to give a medicine. You think it is unnecessary not to give that medicine. But you know it won't hurt the patient. And you can't refuse orders without getting fired. So you do it. But you disagree inside. Okay? So the rule is if you can avoid helping, not doing something bad, then avoid it. But if you have to help, make sure you don't agree with the evil and no harm happens. Okay? Yon. So there are actually, aside from formal and material cooperation, there are also other two types, the proximate cooperation and the remote cooperation. Okay? Um, the proximate cooperation is, of course, close and essential to evil. While the remote cooperation is contingent and accidental only. Okay? Um, with the remote, if you, as I said a while ago, with the formal cooperation, this means you agree, no, with the bad action. You support it. And with proximate cooperation, you are also supporting it closely. You are the one doing it. You are doing something to do that bad action. And your cooperation, your proximate cooperation is essential for the action to be done, for the evil or the bad action to be done. So formal and proximate no cooperation are actually unacceptable. But material and remote uh, can be can lessen the gravity. No, it can be permissible as long as there is no harm no to that is done. Okay? Yon. For example, remote. For example, you are a staff in a in a pharmacy. Then someone buys a medicine. You thought that it will not, you thought that it will be used according to what is it is supposed to be, to be used. But it so happened that that medicine pala will be used to harm someone. So yun. But you have no knowledge about it. And also, uh, yun, because it came with a prescription. So you thought that it was a normal action at the time to facilitate the selling of that medicine. No? You thought it was just a normal part of your duty. But then it so happened, without you knowing it, that that medicine bala was used to harm someone else. And that is a remote cooperation. So it's accidental. It's contingent. So, uh, of course, the gravity of your action is less. And yun, it can be morally permissible. Okay. But then again, what is morally unacceptable are formal and proximate cooperation to do bad things. Do you get it? So again, these types of cooperation will help you decide when something is wrong, no, and when you are just part of the team, no, you are just following instructions. Now, another related ethical principle is the principle of the common good and subsidiarity. This can also help you decide on certain actions. Common good means that we are to think of everyone, not just one person. Healthcare isn't just for rich people or important people, it's for the whole community. So when we make rules or share resources, we ask what is the best for the most people. Okay? Example, we run vaccination programs, not just to help one kid, but to stop sickness from spreading to everyone. And that is the idea of the common good. Subsidiarity, on the other hand, means solve it at the smallest level first. If you can fix a problem yourself, fix it. If the family can decide, let them decide. Only go to higher authorities if you cannot solve it. Okay, for example, if a patient is uncomfortable, you adjust the bed. You don't call the hospital director just to fix a bed. Okay? So, yon. We keep things simple and fast by following the principle of subsidiarity. Another related principle is the principle of stewardship. No, it's actually a beautiful idea. It means you are not the owner. You are the caretaker. So imagine someone gives you their expensive car to take care of while they are away. So you wash it, you park it safely, you don't crash it, you don't let anyone damage it. That's stewardship. Now in nursing, you take care of the patient's life like it is a precious gift. So you protect it, you protect life. Okay? Um, how about the resources? Medicine, bandages, electricity beds. These are given to us to use for patients, so we don't waste them. We don't throw away good supplies. That is practicing the principle of stewardship. For the environment, we keep the ward clean, safe, and fresh. We respect everything because you are just looking after it for others. Okay? Now, there are uh, different types of stewardship. Okay. Actually, I think I forgot to mention in the previous slide, no. The origin of stewardship, it actually comes from the biblical and religious teachings, no, that we are not managers. That we are managers, not owners. We are entrusted with things that belong to God or to the community, and we must care for them well. In modern ethics, it was expanded to include social, no, and environmental responsibility. And this was developed by Viach and Gildray Grimes, no, in 2019 to show that nurses have duties far beyond the bedside. So it means you are not just an employee, you are a guardian, a caretaker, and a leader. So you are entrusted with something valuable and you must protect it. Okay? And so again, we have three types of stewardship. The personal stewardship is the first type. No, we value patient priorities and self-determination. Mentors and personal coaches, lifelong learning, and succession planning. You are the guardian of the patient's life rights and dignity. You protect their choices, their wishes, and their well being. You are also a guardian of yourself. So you keep learning, growing, and improving so you can be the best nurse. You teach and guide new nurses. You pass on the good values. Okay? And these are all personal stewardship. Example, you make sure the patient wishes are always followed, even when others forget. Second is social stewardship. When we work for collective goals, when we consider broader society and environment, we promote the rule of law and democracy. Human rights and equitable wealth distribution, we also promote it. We also invest in human capital and in social stability and long term planning. So, in social stewardship, you are a guardian of society. You work for the good of everyone, not just one patient. You promote fairness, justice, human rights, and equality. You follow rules. No, you follow laws that protect people. You help build a healthy, fair, and safe community. That is social stewardship. Okay? Specific example would be you speak up when you see unfair treatment or violation of rights because it hurts everyone. Okay, that is social stewardship. Third is ecological stewardship. When you are a caretaker of environment. So when you protect ecological resilience, restoration and protection, when you support scientific research, rules on reduce, reuse, recycle, and support moral and practical incentives, then we can say that you are the guardian of the world. No, and that is ecological stewardship. You know that health depends on a safe, clean environment. You protect the nature, reduce waste, and use resources wisely. Okay? Example, you do not waste supplies. You dispose waste properly. You save energy. That is the principle of ecological stewardship. Okay? And stewardship requires balancing self, society, and environment, now with commitment to human dignity and common good. So your job is not just to care for a patient in bed. You are a steward of life, of rights, of justice, of nature, and of the future. Okay? And that is actually one the greatness of our profession. Another related ethical principle is the principle of totality and integrity. These two go together and explain why we can do things like surgery or amputation. Totality says the whole is more important than the part. If one part of the body is sick, dangerous, or hurting the rest of the body, we can remove that part to save the whole person. Example: a foot has gangrene, no, or has dead infected tissue. If we leave it, the infection kills the whole body. So we remove the foot. We lost a part, but we saved the whole person. And that is the principle of totality. Okay? Integrity, on the other hand, says don't change or cut the body unless you have to. We want to keep them whole and complete. We only cut or change if it's necessary for health. Okay? So the rule is you can only do it if the part is dangerous, there is no other choice, and saving life matter most than losing a part. Okay? So again, the three conditions in simple terms is that the part is dangerous, that's why you need to remove it. There are no other choice. And number three is saving life is more important than losing that part that needs to be cut. Okay? Now let's apply totality and totality, no, and autonomy to organ donation. This is actually another big topic. What is good and ethical? Someone chooses freely to give a kidney or part of a liver to save someone else. No money changes hands. It's a gift. They understand risks and agree. They are healthy enough to survive without that kidney or part of the liver. Then that is good and ethical. Okay? For example, the brother gives kidney to a sister, father gives to son, a stranger gives to a stranger his kidney. That is good because again, uh, it can save someone else. As long as there are no money exchanges, and if ever there is, it's a gift, no given. They both understand the risks and agree. And the one who is giving the kidney or part of the liver is healthy enough to survive without it, then that is morally acceptable. But what is bad and illegal? It what is bad and illegal is selling organs for money. Rich people buying kidneys from poor people, that is also bad and illegal. Forcing someone to donate. Taking organs from someone who did not agree, that is actually a crime. And remember, before taking organs, doctors must confirm brain death strictly. Okay? So there are four signs, no, that needs to be considered. Four signs of brain death, no, that must be confirmed before harvesting the organs. Okay? And these four signs of brain death must be repeated uh, after 24 hours. No, the test for these four signs must be repeated after 24 hours. And there has to be no mistakes. Okay? So yun. It also flash in the screen are organ donation, no? Wherein we can see no the ethical problems that can occur. For renewable organs, there are few ethical problems, of course. For paired organs, it is not unethical, but it has risks. Okay? For non-paired organs, like heart and liver, of course, it is unethical, no, except in rare cases. Cadaver donation is ethically correct with due respect. No, automatic or harvesting without permission is unacceptable. So kailangan again to confirm brain death before harvesting. Uh, as to obligation to donate, there is no natural or legal obligation no to donate organs. So it depends on the person if he or she wants to donate his organs up after his death. Okay? So always consider minimal risk versus benefit analysis. Now here is a classic case. It uses almost every principle we learn. No, this is about This is a case about organ donation. A 45-year-old father is healthy. His 18-year-old son has kidney failure and will die or be on dialysis forever unless he gets a new kidney. The father says, I want to give one of my kidneys to my son because I love him and I want him to live. Okay? Now, the dilemma is for integrity, integrity says, the principle of integrity tells us that we should not damage a healthy body. And cutting a healthy person is harm. In the principle of totality, saving a life is more important than having two kidneys. And one kidney is enough to live normally. For autonomy, father chooses freely. No one forced him. He understands. He understands the risk. And for justice, the son deserves fair chance at life. But then again, yun nga, the principle of integrity tells us that should not damage a healthy body. Now, how do you navigate again this situation? The totality, we need to observe the totality rule. The whole life must be more than one part. So losing one kidney is small compared to saving a life. For the principle of autonomy, father is competent, informed, no, and voluntary. So his autonomy is respected. Uh, Another rule is no, there has to be no money involved. So it's a pure gift. There are no profit. Another rule is safety. Medical tests confirm that the organ donation of the one kidney is safe for both. So the decision is to allow and support this donation. Now the lesson here is that it is ethical and beautiful to sacrifice a part of your body to save a life. If it is voluntary, safe and free, then it is morally acceptable. Okay? Now, a while ago, we were mentioning about harvesting the organs. So again, before harvesting organs, there has to be there has to be conditions. And in organ harvesting, the brain death criteria must be observed. Okay, this is critical, no, for organ donation and end of life care. So how do we really know if someone is dead? Okay, brain death means the brain has stopped working forever. The heart might still beat on a machine, but the person is gone. So according to the Harvard criteria for brain death, there are all four signs that you need to check. First is unreceptivity and unresponsiveness. So there is no response. Nothing wakes them up. Nothing hurts them. Nothing makes them move. Okay. Second is there is no movement or breathing. So no breath. Machine breathes for them. They never breathe on their own. The third condition is that there are no reflexes present. So eyes don't react to light, throat doesn't react, no, there is no gag reflex, nothing. And then fourth is the flat electroencephalogram or the flat EEG. So machine shows zero brain activity, no, like a blank paper. So these four criteria, no, according to the Harvard, is our criteria, no, to declare if someone is really dead. And this has to be checked prior to organ harvesting. And please take note, no, that you must wait 24 hours and test again, no, for these four signs. There has to be no mistakes allowed. Now, once confirmed, it is legal death, and organs can be taken if they were agreed upon before. Okay? So again, do not forget the confirmation protocol. All tests must be repeated 24 hours later to confirm brain death. All right. Now, let's pause and put everything we learned together. And this is actually your master list, no, to remember. The big four rules again, or big four uh, ethical principles are, yes, beneficence, non-maleficence, justice, and autonomy. The three other rules uh, is to tell the truth, no, the veracity, confidentiality, fidelity. And the other ethical principles that serves as your toolbox would be the principle of double effect, the principle of totality, the principle of stewardship. Okay? And then there are also laws, no, that we need to remember. Okay, the Patient's Bill of Rights, the Republic Act 9439, Republic Act 10932, and of course, the informed consent. We also need to remember the cultural considerations, no, family orientation to illness, the non-confrontational attitude, and of course, the legal framework, the DOH regulation, constitutional foundations, administrative orders. Okay, so in conclusion, ethics is the foundation of healthcare practice, and we need to maintain trust in healthcare. We also need to ensure patient-centered care, and we need to uphold human dignity. So, in simple terms, family matters.